The phone rang while I was still trying to find the sugar for my coffee. It was early, the kind of early where the light through the kitchen window is soft and almost kind. I was wearing my old pink robe, the one with a tear under the sleeve that I keep meaning to sew. I had barely slept that night. Something in me had been uneasy for days. A feeling I couldn't shake, like I was standing on the edge of something and didn't know what was below. When I answered, I thought maybe it was a telemarketer or maybe the pharmacy calling about my refill. But the voice was different, cold, too formal. "Mrs. Dolores Martinez?" I hesitated. "Yes, speaking. This is Jennifer from First Line Credit Union. I'm calling regarding a past due payment on your personal loan. This is your final notice before legal proceedings begin." My stomach twisted. "Loan? I haven't taken any loan?" Silence on the line for a second, then paper shuffling. "Ma'am, the documents show a loan of $50,000 taken in your name 2 months ago. You signed for it at our branch on Maple Avenue." My heart stopped. Maple Avenue? That was 2 cities over. I hadn't been there in years. My hand was shaking now, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. "Jennifer, I didn't sign anything. There must be a mistake." There was a pause again, and then that same professional, detached tone. "The signature on file matches the one we have in your records, ma'am. We also have video footage of the signing. We recommend you visit your nearest branch as soon as possible." I barely remember hanging up. The receiver felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I stood there in my kitchen, the kettle hissing behind me. That strange, soft light, now feeling like a spotlight on everything I didn't understand. It was like time had frozen. My first thought wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the bank. It was about my son, Andre. Because something inside me, something that no mother ever wants to admit, not even to herself, just knew. It was like every red flag I had ignored for months, every uncomfortable moment, every paper he asked me to sign without reading. It all came crashing down on me in that 1 second. My knees buckled and I slid down to the floor, my back against the fridge, the cold seeping into my bones as tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from betrayal. How could he? How dare he? I gave everything to that boy. Everything. From the moment I found out I was pregnant, it was like I stopped existing for myself and started existing only for him. I worked double shifts, took buses across town at night, cleaned houses where the owners wouldn't even look me in the eye. I did it all so he could have something better, a chance, a future. And now, alone, in my name? My hands were trembling as I reached for the drawer where I kept old papers. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe something to tell me I was wrong. But I wasn't. I knew it in my bones. 2 weeks earlier, Andre had shown up with his usual smile and that fake warmth in his voice that, now I realize, I should have paid attention to. He brought takeout and called it a mother-son night, something he hadn't done in years. He said he was worried about my health, about me living alone in a big house, that it was time to think about downsizing. Less stress, more comfort, he said. Then came the papers. "It's just a form for your protection, man," he smiled. "It helps me take care of things in case something ever happens to you. It's what people do now." I didn't read them. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because what kind of mother believes her own son is lying to her? He sat across from me, sipped his soda, and told me how lucky we were to have each other. How his friends were jealous he had a mom who still cooked for him, who still cared. That night, after he left, I even prayed. Thanked God for giving me a son like Andre. And now I sat on the cold floor of my kitchen with a bank on the line, and my name buried under a pile of debt I never asked for. I kept thinking, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he needed the money and meant to pay it back. Maybe this is temporary. Maybe I'm overreacting. I repeated that over and over like a prayer, like a spell. Maybe. But that little voice in me, the one I ignored too many times before, was screaming now. What hurt the most wasn't even the money. It was the lies, the manipulation, the smile he wore when he stole from me with my own hands. And then came the fear. What else did he do in my name? Did he take more loans? Did he sell the house? Did he? No, he wouldn't. But the thought was there. And once it was there, I couldn't erase it. I pulled myself off the floor and sat at the table. I couldn't cry. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to see. I grabbed the small notebook where I had jotted down his visits, his odd requests, even the dates he brought papers. One of the entries stood out. March 15th, Andre brought papers. Said something about power of attorney. Said just sign, don't worry. That was the day. That was the day I unknowingly gave my son the keys to ruin me. The worst part? I still wanted to believe there was a good reason. Because the heart of a mother doesn't break all at once. It breaks in layers, in stages, peeling back every excuse you've ever made until you're left with the raw truth. And that truth was about to consume me. There's a reason these stories are often kept in silence. Shame, guilt, the kind of pain that doesn't bruise the skin but leaves a permanent scar on the soul. Financial abuse by family members is one of the most invisible forms of betrayal, and yet it happens every day, in silence, behind closed doors, wrapped in words like, trust me, or it's for your own good. Have you ever signed something you didn't understand, just because someone you loved asked you to? Has anyone ever made you feel like questioning them was betrayal? If yes, please comment down below. I want to hear from you. Write, they used my trust against me. If you've ever felt that sting of betrayal, your voice matters. Your story matters. And trust me, this is just the beginning. My name is Dolores Martinez. I was born in a small town tucked into the flat, dusty heart of California, where the summers felt like the sun sat right on your shoulders and the winters were mostly wind and prayers for rain. Now I'm 69 years old, living alone. Or at least I was, until my own son turned my life upside down. When you hear people say they gave their life for their child, it's easy to imagine it's just a phrase, something poetic, something said in passing. But for me, it was literal. Every year, every month, every aching morning, I dragged myself out of bed before the sun rose. It was for Andre. He came into my world like a lightning strike, unplanned, unforeseen. I was 22, working as a cashier at a rundown grocery store when I found out I was pregnant. His father, Daniel, was charming, but that kind of charm that doesn't stick. The kind that disappears when responsibility shows up. When I told him I was carrying his child, he vanished. No note, no call, just gone. I was terrified. I had no savings, no support, and no clue how I was going to raise a child on my own. But I also had something else, a fire inside me. I didn't know how to give up, so I didn't. I worked through my pregnancy, stocking shelves with swollen ankles, smiling at customers while hiding the nausea. And when Andre was born, this tiny, wrinkled miracle with a full head of dark hair and a scream that could shake windows, I looked at him and thought, okay, little one, we'll figure this out together. We didn't have much. For years, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The air always smelled faintly of detergent, and the walls were so thin I could hear every argument from the neighbors. But I made it a home. I painted the walls soft blue, hung a curtain with stars so Andre could dream big. I worked nights cleaning offices and days as a nanny, taking care of other people's babies while mine was in daycare. Sometimes I'd sneak away from work during lunch just to peek through the daycare window to see him napping with his thumb in his mouth or babbling to a toy. I used to watch him and whisper to myself, one day, all this struggle will be worth it. He'll grow up and never have to know this kind of exhaustion. Andre was a good boy growing up, smart, curious, sensitive. He'd cry if he saw another kid get hurt. He always wanted to help me in the kitchen, standing on a stool to stir pancake batter while making a mess I'd gladly clean. Every time he hugged me, I felt like maybe I hadn't failed at everything. Maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. He was my pride. I talked about him to anyone who would listen, at church, at work, to the bus driver. My son is going to be someone, I'd say. He's going to make it out of all this. I made sure he had everything I never did. New shoes every school year, even if it meant I wore the same pair for 5. I saved for books, paid for extracurriculars, let him chase dreams, even if I didn't understand them. When he wanted to take piano lessons, I found a neighbor who taught for cheap. When he needed a laptop for school, I worked weekends cleaning motel rooms until I could afford a used one. There were nights I came home so tired I couldn't feel my feet, but then I'd find a little note on the fridge in his messy handwriting. "I love you, Mom. You're the best." And I'd cry, standing there in the kitchen, clutching a note like it was gold. So when Andre got into college, I cried again, but this time from joy. He was the first in our family to go. I still remember the day we got the acceptance letter. He ran into the living room, waving it like a golden ticket. I hugged him so tight, he told me I was breaking his ribs. I worked extra hours to pay for his dorm deposit, took out a small loan to help with books. I told him not to worry, that we'd find a way. That's what I always said. We'll find a way. When he graduated, I wore my best dress, the one with the tiny embroidered flowers near the hem. I sat in the sun for hours just to hear his name called. I clapped until my hands hurt. My boy, my baby, a college graduate. But then, things began to shift. He moved to the city, got a job, a new apartment. At first he called often, told me about the office politics, the traffic, the girl he was dating. But slowly the calls came less. He was always busy, and when he did visit, it was different. He looked tired, distracted. He'd check his phone during dinner. When I asked questions, his answers were short, but I told myself he was adjusting, growing up. Maybe that's just how sons get. I didn't see the distance growing like a shadow between us. I didn't let myself believe that the boy who used to cry when I had a headache could turn cold. The house we lived in for the past 15 years, it wasn't fancy, but it was home. I bought it after years of saving, fixed the roof myself when leaks started, painted the porch every summer. Every creaky floorboard held a memory. I thought it would be mine until I died. That house, it was supposed to be ours. So when Andre came to visit more frequently, I was overjoyed. I thought, he's coming back to me. I didn't question why he brought takeout and wine, or why he suddenly wanted to help with bills and paperwork. I let myself believe the lie that maybe, just maybe, he was realizing how much I meant to him. He would say things like, "Mai, you shouldn't have to worry about anything anymore," or, "Let me take care of you now." And then casually, he brought the papers. "Just some documents for peace of mind," he said. I didn't read them. I didn't even hesitate. Because how could I believe that the child I carried in my arms, the one who fell asleep on my chest night after night, would ever do me harm? That was the moment I lost everything. And I didn't even know it yet. If you're watching this, and any of what I've said feels familiar, if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to be left in silence, please share your voice. Leave a comment that says, "I gave everything, and it still wasn't enough." Or just tell me your story. I read them all, and I promise you this, you are not alone. It started with little things. That's always how it begins, doesn't it? Not with something obvious, no lightning bolts or screams or slammed doors, just quiet shifts, subtle changes, a comment here, a look there, things that only make sense when you look back, like connecting stars to find a constellation you couldn't see before. Andre started visiting more often, always with a smile and that familiar smell of his cologne that used to make my heart warm. He'd hug me just a bit too tightly, hold on for just a second longer, and whisper, "You're all I've got, Mai. I don't know what I'd do without you." It melted me, every single time. He'd show up with takeout from that Chinese place we used to go to on Sundays when he was little. Or he'd bring a tub of that pistachio ice cream I love, the one he used to call green goo when he was 6. It was like a carefully crafted performance, each act building on the last, drawing me back into a closeness we hadn't shared in years. And I wanted to believe in it so badly. I craved it. I missed my son. He'd sit at the table, talking about work stress and how hard it was to make it out there, alone. He said people in the city were ruthless, that he didn't trust anyone, that sometimes he just needed to come home and breathe. Home. That word hit different coming from him. Then came the suggestions. First, he talked about the size of the house. "It's too big for you, Mun," he said gently, tapping his fingers against his coffee mug. "You shouldn't have to vacuum rooms you don't even use." I laughed, said it was fine, that the house kept me moving, kept me from stiffening up too much. But then he'd bring it up again. "You deserve something easier, cozier, something with less responsibility." That word, responsibility, sounded rehearsed in his mouth. Then came the health questions. "My, when was your last checkup? Are you still forgetting things like before? Didn't you say your knees hurt more lately?" At first, I thought it was sweet, caring. But then I noticed he'd write things down in a little black notebook he always kept in his jacket pocket. Things I never asked him to write. Notes about my prescriptions, about my last power bill, about who mowed my lawn. One night, after dinner, he brought out a folder, thick, neatly labeled, sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "This is just a safety plan, mine. Something to make sure everything's in place in case anything ever happens. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." He said it like a gift, like I was lucky. My heart tightened, but I smiled, because how could I say no to someone who looked at me like that? My boy, my blood, the reason I had survived the hardest years of my life. I asked what it was, and he brushed it off. "Power of attorney," he said casually, as if it were nothing more than a library card. "Just standard stuff. It lets me handle your bills, your property, little things in case you ever need help." He reached across the table, took my hand in both of his, and looked me in the eyes. "You trust me, don't you?" God help me, I did. He didn't pressure me to sign that night. No, he was smarter than that. He left the folder on the table, kissed my forehead and said, "Think about it. I only want what's best for you." I didn't read a single page. I couldn't bring myself to. The guilt of even needing to read it, like doing so meant I didn't trust him, was too much. He was my son. If I couldn't trust him, who could I trust? 2 days later, I signed. I even thanked him afterward. Thanked him. He hugged me and said, "This is going to make everything so much easier." And that's when things started changing fast. The next time he came over, he talked about a new plan. Said there were places in town that offered assisted living for seniors who were still independent. Said it was like living in a resort, that I deserved to be pampered. I told him I didn't need that. I had my home, my neighbors, my garden. But he smiled and said, "You don't need to worry about anything anymore, Mai. Let me take care of you now." I told myself it was love, that this was him stepping up, becoming the man I raised him to be. But deep down, something started to ache. He started taking calls in the hallway, whispering, locking his phone when I walked into the room. He began collecting mail from my porch before I could get to it. Said it was just junk, but I never got to see it, and I let it happen. Because when you raise a child alone, you cling to the hope that your sacrifices meant something, that they noticed, that they love you enough to protect you in your final years the way you protected them in their first. I ignored the red flags. I told myself I was imagining things, even when the utilities were transferred out of my name, even when my bank called and said there were changes to my account access, even when the nurse at the clinic mentioned someone had called asking for my medical records. I looked the other way, because the alternative, accepting that your own child is manipulating you, feels like trying to breathe underwater. You just can't. Then one morning, he came by with breakfast and a rushed smile. Said he had an appointment across town but wanted to check in. We chatted for a few minutes. He told me how beautiful my hair looked and how proud he was of me. And then, casually, he asked for my driver's license. Just needed to confirm something for that senior plan I mentioned. Nothing major. I hesitated, but he made a joke. Something about me going on wild road trips. I laughed and handed it over. He never gave it back. That was the last day I ever held any control over my own life. Because after that, the decisions were no longer mine. If you're watching this, and any part of what I've said feels familiar, please pause for a moment. Think about how often we justify the small things, how often we choose silence over confrontation, especially when it comes to the people we love the most. Abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like a smile, a hug, a paper slipped in front of you at the kitchen table. Have you ever ignored your instincts because love convinced you to? If so, write in the comments. I trusted my heart, and it blinded me. Let your story breathe. You never know who you might help by speaking up. The day it all changed was quiet. Too quiet, now that I look back. The kind of day where the air is still, the sky is pale, and the silence feels heavy, like something waiting to break. I had just come back from the grocery store, the usual little trip I made every Tuesday morning. I remember holding a paper bag full of things only I would think to buy. Canned beans on sale, a small bag of jasmine rice, the shampoo I liked that smelled faintly of coconut. As I stepped up to my front porch, my hand reached into my bag, fumbling for the keys. They were always clipped to that little pink ribbon I kept since Andre was a baby. He had given it to me on Mother's Day when he was 5. I told myself I'd carry it forever. I slipped the key into the lock, and it didn't turn. At first I thought maybe I had the wrong key. I tried again. Nothing. I tried harder, jiggling the knob, confused. My heart started to thud in my chest. Not a fast panic, but something colder, slower, like fear trying to claw its way out. I knocked on the door, still clutching my grocery bag. Andre opened it. He was standing there in a pressed shirt, like he had somewhere important to be. Behind him, I could see the house I cleaned every Sunday, where every photo frame held my memories, where the scent of lavender from my cleaning sprays still lingered. But something was off. There were boxes stacked in the hallway. My hallway. "Hey, Mai," he said with that same soft voice he'd been using lately. "I was just about to call you." I smiled, confused. "The door's not opening. I think something's wrong with the lock." He didn't move. He just looked at me. And then, out of nowhere, 2 men appeared behind him. Strangers. One of them was tall, wearing gloves, carrying a clipboard. The other was younger, holding a set of keys. I took a step back. "What's going on?" Andre sighed, as if I were a child making a scene in public. He reached out gently, took the grocery bag from my hand, and placed it on the ground beside the porch. "Mai," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about your safety, about your future." Something in his tone changed, like he was no longer speaking to me as his mother, but as a burden, a task, a problem to solve. "You've been saying how tired you are lately, how the house is getting too big, too hard to manage, and I agree. It's not safe for you anymore. The stairs, the cleaning, the maintenance. You shouldn't have to worry about any of that." He gestured to the men behind him. "So, I've made arrangements. A lovely woman named Beverly runs a small, cozy place about 15 minutes from here. You'll have your own room, meals prepared, laundry done for you, a calm environment with people your age. It's for your own good, Mai." I stood there, frozen. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Why can't I go inside?" He took a deep breath. "Because the house, it's no longer in your name." It hit me like a slap. I had heard the words, I had processed them, but they didn't make sense in my body, like they were floating outside of me, spoken in another language. I felt dizzy, like the ground under my feet was shifting. "No longer. In my name?" He nodded. "You signed the papers, remember? A few weeks ago. That was part of it. It was just to make sure I could help with everything. And now that I can, I've done what's best for both of us. I sold the house." I couldn't breathe. The men were still behind him, watching, silent, like this was just another job to them, like I was just another old woman who needed to be handled. I looked at Andre, searching for something, anything that reminded me of my son, but I couldn't find him. All I saw was a stranger in his skin. "You sold my home?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Without telling me?" "It was already hard enough to convince you to sign," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then he looked up at me again, trying to soften his face. "Mai, I'm doing this out of love. You don't need the stress. You deserve rest. Peace. Peace." I had scrubbed the floors of that house with my bare hands, repaired the roof by saving every dime, planted roses in the front yard with soil I carried one bag at a time. That house wasn't just walls. It was my life, my struggle, my safety. And now I was being locked out of it like a trespasser. Before I could say anything else, one of the men stepped forward and gently but firmly took my arm. "Ms. Martinez, if you'll come with us, we'll help you get settled in your new residence." I pulled away. "Don't touch me." Andre sighed again, as if I were being difficult, as if I was ruining some perfect plan he had orchestrated. "I already moved your clothes, Man," he said. "Everything's taken care of." I stared at him, tears burning at the back of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Not yet." "You moved my things?" He nodded. "I left the kitchen stuff," he added, like it was a consolation prize. "I figured you wouldn't need it where you're going." He figured. He figured I wouldn't need my pots, my baking trays, my family recipes, my life. I don't remember getting into the car. I think I was still in shock. The men helped me into the back seat, and I sat there, silent, as the driver turned on the radio like it was any other day. They took me to a beige house on a quiet street. It wasn't a facility, like he made it sound. It was just a woman's house. She ran an unofficial boarding situation for seniors, with small rooms and thin walls and meals that tasted like salt and sadness. They showed me to a room at the back of the house. A twin bed, a dresser, one small window that barely let in light. The mattress creaked when I sat down. There were no photos, no smells that were mine, no space that belonged to me. I wasn't home anymore. I was parked, abandoned with just enough comfort to keep me quiet. Andre didn't stay. He didn't even help me settle in. He said he had work and promised to call me later. He kissed my forehead and left. I never saw him again that week. That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too numb. I kept thinking, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is temporary. Maybe he knows what he's doing. Maybe I just don't see it yet. I clung to that word, maybe. Because sometimes hope is the only thing you have left when everything else is taken from you. If you've ever felt erased, removed from your own story like a character you created but no longer control, then I need you to tell me. Comment below. I watched my life disappear, and no one stopped it. Because someone out there needs to know they're not the only one. The first night in that room was the quietest of my life, but not a comforting quiet. Not the kind you feel on a Sunday afternoon while reading by a window. This was the kind of silence that presses against your skin, that hums in your ears, that makes you question if you're still real. I lay there, flat on the mattress that smelled faintly of antiseptic and someone else's memories. The sheets were too white, like they were trying to erase anything warm or personal. There was a small lamp on the dresser, but I left it off. I didn't want to see the beige walls or the dusty ceiling fan or the cross above the door that someone had nailed there to make the place feel holy. I stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't cry. I think I wanted to, but something inside me had gone still, hollow, like I was watching myself from a distance, watching this old woman, grocery bag still sitting on some porch she used to call home, now curled up in a stranger's back room, wondering how it all slipped through her fingers. Andre didn't call that night. Not the next morning either. The woman who ran the house, Beverly, knocked once, then came in without waiting. She smiled the way people do when they don't know how to treat someone they pity. "I made eggs," she said, "and toast. You eat yet?" I hadn't, but I lied and said I wasn't hungry. She nodded and left the tray anyway. I ate the toast cold, sitting at the edge of the bed. The eggs were overcooked, rubbery. I ate them too. It wasn't about hunger. It was about control, about reminding myself I still had a say in something, even if it was just whether or not to eat a meal I didn't ask for. That's the part people don't talk about with this kind of betrayal. The slow unraveling of your autonomy, your choices, yourself. The morning passed like a fog. I kept expecting Andre to call, to show up, to say it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding, to take me home. But he didn't. Instead, mail started arriving. Not to me at first, but to the house. One envelope after another, all with my name. Letters with important logos in the corner, medical, financial, legal, all addressed to me, but none that I had seen before. I asked Beverly if I could see them. She told me Andre had given instructions that all mail should go directly to him, that it would only stress me out, as if I were fragile, incompetent, incapable. I started to see the pattern. Every call I tried to make from the house phone redirected to voicemail. My cell phone, older than most, had no credit, no messages, no contacts. My purse had been emptied of all but the basics, an ID, a $20 bill, and a pair of reading glasses. The photos I kept of Andre as a baby, folded in my wallet for years, were missing. I asked Beverly if I could go to the grocery store myself, just to walk, just to breathe. She hesitated, then said it was against the policy for new residents. Residents. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't staying with a friend. I was a resident, a person tucked away, managed, removed from the outside world for her own safety. I started to feel like a ghost inside my own life, each day blurred into the next. I sat on the back porch, watching birds flutter near the feeder someone had set up. I listened to the hum of traffic in the distance. I memorized the patterns in the floor tiles of my room just to give my brain something to hold on to. And still, Andre didn't call. One night, around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and padded barefoot down the hallway to the small shared kitchen. I needed something, anything, that reminded me I was still alive. I opened the fridge and just stood there, bathed in the cold fluorescent light, pretending I was back in my own kitchen. I imagined the smell of onions sautéing in butter, the steam from rice, the clink of my favorite pan as I set it on the stove. I imagined the weight of my home around me, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the back door, the whisper of curtains catching a breeze. But all I had was silence. I missed my plants, my armchair, my chipped coffee mug. I missed my life. And the worst part? I was too ashamed to tell anyone. Because how do you explain that your own child betrayed you? How do you look someone in the eye and admit that the person you raised, loved, fed, prayed over, turned around and treated you like an obstacle? The shame doesn't scream. It doesn't shout. It sits in your bones. It whispers. It says, you must have done something wrong. It says, you should have seen it coming. It says, you don't matter anymore. And I started to believe it. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived. Hand-delivered this time by a courier in a dark blue uniform. Beverly took it from him and placed it on the table in the common area, not even looking at me when she said, "This one's addressed to you directly. Guess it slipped through." I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a formal notice from the bank. It was about a loan, one I didn't recognize. A past due notice, $50,000, my name, my address, my signature. But I had never been there. I had never signed anything. My breath caught in my throat. The paper shook in my hands. My name was being used, my identity, my trust, my life. That's when everything started to spin, not metaphorically, literally. My vision blurred. My heart pounded so loud it echoed in my ears. I sat down, hard, on the edge of the nearest chair, pressing the paper to my chest like it could somehow steady me. Andre had done more than just take my house. He had taken my name. He had used my trust, my love, my silence, and turned it into a weapon. And I hadn't even seen it coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying every moment I ignored. Every, "It's just for your protection." Every, "Don't worry, I've got it." Every smile he gave me while stealing everything I had. I had wanted to believe I mattered. But in that moment, I realized I had let him convince me I didn't. If you've ever been made to feel like you were too much to deal with, if someone ever silenced your instincts with fake concern or fake love, please, speak now. Leave a comment that says, "They called it love, but it felt like control." Your words can reach someone who's still stuck in silence. And sometimes that can be the first crack in a wall someone's been trapped behind for far too long. The paper was still in my lap when the sun started to rise. I hadn't moved. I had barely blinked. My body felt stiff, cold, like I was made of stone and grief all at once. The words on the page danced before my eyes. Overdue balance, signed authorization, final notice. But what I really saw wasn't ink or numbers. What I saw was his hand. My son's hand, guiding mine as I signed those papers weeks ago. His voice soft, telling me not to worry, that everything was just a formality. It was never just a formality. It was theft. It was betrayal. It was my child weaponizing my trust against me in the most brutal, intimate way. I pressed my fingers to my temple, trying to breathe through the pressure building in my skull. I felt like I was splitting in two. One half of me still wanted to believe this was some horrible misunderstanding, some mistake that could be fixed with a phone call. The other half, the part that was done lying to herself, knew that wasn't true anymore. He had done this. He had done this with purpose, with planning, with calm calculation. And I had let him. Not because I was stupid, not because I was weak, but because I loved him, because I raised him to be someone I could believe in, because every sleepless night, every missed meal, every single thing I ever gave up. I did it for him. So how could I not trust the person I built my entire life around? But trust, when it's not honored, turns into a kind of poison. It seeps into your bones. It clouds your thinking. It tells you to hush your instincts, to dismiss your fears. Until one day, you look up and realize your whole world has been dismantled, piece by the very hands you once cradled in your own. That morning, I walked out into the tiny backyard of the house. The grass was patchy, the wooden bench creaked under my weight, but it was quiet, safe. For a moment, I let the sun hit my face, and I imagined being back on my own porch, sipping coffee, listening to birdsong without that ache in my chest. I wanted to go home, but there was no home to return to, not anymore. I kept thinking, how did I become invisible in my own life? When did my choices stop mattering? When did my voice lose its value? I remembered something from years ago, something small. Andre was maybe 10, maybe 11. We were in a small hardware store shopping for paint. He had insisted on helping me repaint the living room. I let him pick the color, and he chose this terrible shade of green. I hated it, but I smiled and told him it was perfect. At the checkout counter, the cashier ignored me completely, spoke only to the man behind me. I'd had that happen a lot back then, being dismissed, passed over, treated like I wasn't even standing there. Later, when we were walking home, Andre asked, "Why didn't you say something, Mai? That man was rude." I laughed and said, "Sometimes it's easier not to make noise." Now, sitting on that old bench, I realized how deep that habit had grown. All my life, I had chosen silence, deference. I didn't complain when I was overlooked, disrespected, dismissed. I just kept moving, kept enduring. And somehow, I had taught my son that I would always endure, that I would always be there, that he could lean on me, lie to me, even use me, and I would stay quiet. But I wasn't quiet now. I was awake. And that terrified me. Not because I didn't want to face the truth, but because I didn't know what to do with it. What does a woman like me do when everything she's built her life around is gone? When your name has been hijacked, your voice silenced, your body shuffled away into a corner like unwanted furniture? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to disappear. I started writing things down that day. Every strange moment I had ignored, every paper I had signed, every conversation with Andre that made my gut twist, even if I had smiled through it at the time. I wrote down dates, names, phrases, and with every word I wrote, I felt a little stronger, like reclaiming pieces of myself I had handed over too easily. I also started asking questions, small ones, quiet ones, but enough to stir discomfort in Beverly's eyes. "Do you know who has access to my medical files? Have any visitors come asking for me? Who's paying for my room here?" She gave vague answers, avoiding eye contact. So I waited for a moment when she was distracted, and I went to the office down the hall. There was a phone there, landline, old but working. I dialed the bank's number from the letter. My hands shook the whole time. I told them my name. The woman on the line confirmed the account. Then she paused. "Ma'am, do you have a police report?" That question echoed in my ears for hours. A police report. I had never called the police in my life. I didn't even know how to begin explaining what had happened. What would I say? My son stole my life? My son used my love like a weapon? Would they believe me? Would they help? I wasn't sure. But that night, I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. Really looked. I saw an old woman, yes, tired, worn, but also, I saw the girl who once crossed the border with nothing but a bag of clothes and a dream. The young mother who worked 2 jobs and still sang lullabies every night. The woman who built a home, raised a child, survived abandonment, poverty, humiliation. I saw strength, even if it had been buried under years of sacrifice. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you lost yourself for the sake of someone you loved, if you've ever stayed quiet just to keep peace, I want you to hear this. You're still in there. Your voice still matters. You have the right to speak, to fight, to exist fully. If anything in this story reflects your pain, if you've ever questioned your own worth after someone you trusted took everything from you, please, Share your truth. Write in the comments. I won't be silent anymore. Let those words be your beginning, because no matter how far gone things may seem, the story isn't over yet. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked for help. Not the quiet kind, the sort you mutter under your breath hoping no one hears. This was different. This time, I said it clearly, loud enough that my own ears would believe it too. Beverly was in the kitchen, chopping celery for what I assumed was one of her bland soups. I stood there for a second, feeling the weight of every word I was about to speak. My heart beat like a drum in my chest. My hands were cold, but steady. I need to go to the police. She stopped chopping, turned slowly. Is something wrong? I looked her dead in the eye. Yes? She didn't argue. She didn't offer fake concern. Just nodded and said, "You'll need an appointment." Her voice was tight. I could feel it. She was nervous. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she had heard whispers. Maybe she had been part of this whole thing from the beginning. Or maybe she was just another person doing what someone else told her to do. I didn't care anymore. By that point, I had spent too many nights surrendering to silence. I had lived too many days watching my reflection shrink in a mirror, pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to pretend anymore. That afternoon, she drove me to a small precinct not far from the boarding house. The building was square, gray, unimpressive, just another block on another quiet street. But to me, it felt like the center of the world, like every step I took inside was a decision to rewrite the story I had been trapped in. The front desk officer, a young man with tired eyes, asked me why I was there, and I froze, not because I didn't know, but because how do you compress that kind of pain into a sentence? How do you tell someone you gave your child everything, and now you don't even have your own name? I think I'm a victim of identity theft, I said softly. I think my son stole from me. Even saying it out loud made my chest hurt, but I said it anyway. The officer blinked, then nodded slowly, typing something into his computer. A few minutes later, I was seated across from a woman detective. Older than me, maybe. Maybe not. Her hair was pulled tight into a bun, her face sharp, unreadable. But her eyes, they weren't cruel. They weren't cold. She listened. I told her everything. The house, the signatures, the loan I never asked for, the papers I signed without understanding, the move to the boarding house, the phone calls that never came, the bank letter. At one point, I looked down and realized my hands were shaking. She handed me a tissue, said nothing, just waited. When I finished, she sat back, took a deep breath, and said, "You're not alone." Those words, they hit like a warm cloth on a wound I didn't know how to clean. She explained the process, that what happened was called elder financial abuse, that it happened more often than anyone wanted to admit, that there were laws, protections, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't weak. She handed me paperwork, lots of it, told me to write down everything I could remember, names, dates, details, that they'd open a case, that there was a chance I could fight this. A chance, not a promise. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something move in my chest. Not pain, not dread, hope. Tiny, fragile, but real. Over the next few days, I became someone else. Not completely. No one ever becomes completely new. But I started piecing myself back together, like patching a quilt made of old fabric. I took long walks outside. I kept writing. I called the bank again. I requested my own credit reports. I spoke to legal aid. I reached out to a local seniors advocacy group. Some people didn't believe me at first. Or worse, they believed me, but treated me like a sad story, a cautionary tale. But I kept pushing. Every time I repeated the story, it hurt less. It didn't feel like a confession anymore. It felt like truth, and truth is powerful. One morning, a call came through to the main phone in the house. It was Andre. For a second, I almost didn't answer. I stared at the phone as it rang, thinking, why now? Was he worried? Had he found out I'd gone to the police? Was he going to apologize? I picked up. His voice was as smooth as ever, soft, familiar. "Mun," he said, "I've been trying to reach you." I stayed quiet. "I've just been really busy. I didn't mean to leave things like that." Still quiet. Then he said it. I heard you've been asking questions, talking to people. My fingers tightened around the receiver. I just think you're confused, he said. You signed those papers, remember? You told me you trusted me. Why are you making this harder? I closed my eyes, took a breath. Then, for the first time in my life, I said it out loud. Because what you did was wrong. Silence. Because you lied to me. You used me. More silence. You took my name, my house, my dignity, and you thought I wouldn't fight back. Still, he didn't say a word. So I finished with this. I may be old, but I'm not invisible. And I'm not done. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was strength. It was anger, yes, but righteous anger, focused, controlled. The kind of anger that rebuilds something broken. That day, I made another phone call. To the detective. I told her about Andre's call. She told me to document everything, that it helped the case. She also told me something else, something that made my breath catch in my throat. The loan he had taken out in my name? It wasn't the only one. There were three loans, totaling over $80,000, and all of them had my signature. But none of them had my consent. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the one person you thought would protect you, if someone has ever tried to erase your voice with fake love and paperwork, I want you to share this moment with me. Write in the comments. They tried to silence me, but I found my voice. Because someone out there is still trying to speak through the fear, and maybe your words will be the push they need. When the detective told me there were 3 loans in my name, not one, I felt something inside me go quiet. Not break, not scream, just quiet. Like my mind couldn't catch up with the information, so it simply stopped moving for a second. Froze, mid-thought. I was holding the phone, staring out the window, watching a squirrel hop along the fence, and all I could think was, how? How had this all happened without me noticing? How had my name been signed 3 times without my hand, my permission, my voice? How long had he been planning this? That's what haunted me more than the money. The realization that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some desperate accident or bad judgment call. This was intentional, cold, precise, rehearsed. He had built a whole future for himself by erasing mine. After the call, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. Wrinkled, yes. Spotted, but strong. These were the hands that bathed him when he had chickenpox. That ironed his school uniform before every test. That cooked every birthday dinner he ever asked for. That clapped the loudest at his graduation. That wiped tears, changed diapers, packed lunches, signed permission slips. And now, he had used those same hands, my signature, to bury me in debt. The detective said they would subpoena the bank documents, that they'd compare the signatures, that sometimes, in cases like this, the forgeries weren't even very good, that fraudsters, even ones with access to intimate details, often got sloppy when they felt too confident. That made me sick, because my son hadn't even needed to be careful. He knew I wouldn't question him. He knew that the woman who gave him everything would never imagine he'd take more than what was freely offered. And he was right. I didn't imagine it. That night, I barely slept. I paced the room, thoughts racing. What else had I missed? What other papers had I signed without understanding? How many other lies had he fed me while looking me in the eye and calling me mine with that soft voice I used to love? The next morning, I called the detective again. I asked if I could see the original loan documents. I needed to look at them with my own eyes, to feel them. I needed to confront the truth head-on, no matter how much it hurt. She said it would take a few days. Those days stretched like years. I spent them in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to waste another word on anyone who didn't deserve to hear it. I stopped talking to Beverly unless it was necessary. I stopped asking for updates. I just waited. And during that wait, something shifted inside me. Not just emotionally, physically. Like my spine straightened. Like my lungs held more air. Like I was slowly stepping back into my own body after being pushed out of it. I started rereading my journals. The pages I had filled when I first got to that house. The ones full of confusion, denial, fear. And then, something happened. I found an entry. It was dated almost 6 weeks before Andre sold the house. In it, I had written something that, at the time, didn't seem important. Today, Andre came by again. He asked about the old insurance policy I took out in '98. I told him it was still in the safe. He smiled, said he'd take a look just to be sure everything was up to date. I didn't think twice. I stopped reading. Insurance policy? My heart dropped. I got up, walked straight to the hallway where my old handbag still hung on the hook behind the door. I rifled through it until I found the worn-out notebook I used to keep tucked between my grocery lists and prayer cards. Inside it were passwords, dates, appointments, and the number of the insurance company. I dialed it. The representative on the other end confirmed that yes, a policy under my name had been recently altered, not canceled, just updated. I asked what had changed. She hesitated, then said, "The beneficiary. It was changed to your son, Andre." I thanked her, hung up, and sat down in the hallway, cold all over. He wasn't just taking from me now. He was planning for later. He had changed my insurance policy, in case I died, so he'd get the money. My blood ran cold. I know that sounds dramatic, like something from a movie. But when you realize the person you brought into this world might be planning for your death, not emotionally, but financially, it changes everything. That was the moment I stopped hoping for reconciliation. That was the moment I knew I was in danger. Not physical, maybe, not yet, but emotional, psychological, legal, spiritual. He had erased my home, my accounts, my credit, my identity, and now he was laying claim to whatever would be left of me when I was gone. And no one knew. No one saw it, because the world doesn't expect abusers to come with soft voices and birthday cards. It doesn't expect theft to come wrapped in "I love yous." It expects bruises, screams, police reports. But this was quiet. This was deadly. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote a letter to Andre, not to beg, not to reason, but to let him know I wasn't blind anymore. It was one sentence long. "You have taken everything from me, but I'm still here." I didn't sign it with love. I didn't call myself mine. I just wrote my full name, the name he had tried to bury under contracts and debt and forged lines, the name I was taking back. If you've ever reached a breaking point like this, if you've ever felt the weight of betrayal so deep that it made you question your very existence, please, don't carry it alone. Write in the comments, "They underestimated me." Let those words be your armor. Let them be your anchor. Because if you're still standing after everything, then you're already stronger than they ever imagined. I didn't send the letter right away. I kept it in my drawer for 3 days, folded neatly inside the envelope like it was holding in more than just paper, like it carried a weight too heavy to trust the mail with. Every morning, I'd wake up, open the drawer, stare at it, and then quietly close it again. Not out of fear, not anymore, but because when you've been silenced for so long, even your words start to feel like weapons, and you don't just throw weapons at someone without knowing where they'll land. So I waited, and while I waited, the police moved forward. The detective called again. She said they had requested surveillance footage from the notary's office where one of the loans had been signed. That was the thing about fraud. They always left traces, even if they were small. Paperwork could be forged, voices could be softened, but cameras didn't lie. She promised to keep me updated. I hung up, then immediately opened the drawer and took out the letter. I walked it to the mailbox myself. I stood there for a moment with the envelope in my hand, staring at his name written in my handwriting, the same way I used to label his lunchboxes when he was 6. I kissed the top corner of the envelope, not out of habit, not out of love, but out of goodbye. Then I dropped it in. That night, I dreamed of my old garden, the roses, the lemon tree, the way the wind used to rustle through the wind chimes I'd hung outside the kitchen window. It wasn't a sad dream. It wasn't angry either. It was quiet, like my mind was letting me visit the parts of my life that he hadn't taken, the memories, the pieces untouched by paperwork and lies. But when I woke up, something felt different. I didn't know it yet, but while I slept, the footage had come in. The next day, I got another call from the detective. Her voice had changed. It wasn't cautious anymore. It was certain. "I need you to come in," she said. "We have something to show you." Beverly drove me again. this time without small talk. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer a weak smile. I think, deep down, she was beginning to understand what was happening. That I wasn't just a confused old woman. That this wasn't just a case of mixed-up paperwork. That I was telling the truth. At the station, the detective led me to a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a screen mounted on the wall. She handed me a bottle of water, sat down across from me, and then played the video. It was grainy but clear enough. I saw him, Andre, dressed in a dark suit, standing confidently at the counter of the notary office. He looked calm, friendly, relaxed. He handed the woman behind the desk a folder. She asked for ID. He gave it to her. Then she turned the screen to him, a digital signature pad. He picked up the stylus, signed. Then he turned and motioned. Another man stepped forward, taller, grayer. He looked like me, but wasn't me. He was holding my ID. I stared at the screen, stunned. The man sat down, signed the second line on the form, mimicking the movements of a signature I'd used all my life. But the slant was wrong, the loop too wide, the pressure inconsistent. The detective paused the video and looked at me. "Do you recognize this man?" I shook my head. My throat was dry. She nodded. "He's a paid impersonator. We confirmed it. He's been used before in 2 other fraud cases in another county." I blinked, not trusting my voice. "And your son?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Then, he coordinated it, provided the ID, booked the appointment. He's on the paperwork as a witness. Everything traces back to him. The room felt cold, not because of the air, but because I had proof now. Undeniable, undisputable. And still, it hurt more than I expected. Because even when you know the truth, even when you've lived the betrayal, there's still a part of you, a small, aching part, that hopes you're wrong, that hopes this nightmare has some other explanation. But there was none. He had faked my presence. He had stolen my signature. He had hired a stranger to become me. I pressed my hand to my chest and closed my eyes, not to cry, not to collapse, but to breathe, because I wasn't done. The detective said the next steps would involve formal charges, that I'd need to give an official statement again, that they'd freeze the fraudulent accounts, that I had options to fight back. I nodded, agreed to everything, and then I asked one question. "Will he go to jail?" She looked at me long and hard. "We can't promise anything, but with this evidence, it's possible, not certain." And somehow, that was enough, because this time I wasn't hoping for his punishment. I was hoping for my freedom, the freedom to reclaim my name, to clear my record, to look at my reflection and not see shame anymore, but strength. That afternoon, I walked out of the station feeling taller, not because anything had been resolved yet, but because for the first time in months, I felt like the system was standing with me, not against me, and I was no longer invisible. I went back to the house, opened my window, let the autumn air rush in. I lit a candle, not for him, but for me, a flame that meant, "You're still here. You still matter. You're not broken beyond repair. If you've made it this far with me, if any part of this story feels like your story, I want you to say it out loud, not to someone else, to yourself. Say, 'I matter. My story matters. I'm still here.' And if you feel ready, write it in the comments. I'm still here. Because you are. And that alone is a revolution." After I walked out of that police station, something shifted inside me. It wasn't relief, not quite. It was more like a sense of grounding, like the earth beneath me had finally stopped shaking. For so long, I had been balancing on broken glass, not even realizing the cuts until they started to bleed. But now, for the first time, I felt the ground firm under my feet. It didn't mean the pain was gone. It didn't mean I forgave. It just meant I had something solid to stand on. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. Back at the boarding house, the light in my room looked different, softer. Or maybe I was seeing it through clearer eyes. The photographs I kept by the windowsill, faded snapshots of my youth, of Andre as a baby, of holidays and birthdays that once meant something, now felt like puzzle pieces from another life. I picked one up, a picture of us in the backyard with a birthday cake, and stared at it for a long time. I tried to remember how I felt in that moment. Not the version I remember now, tainted by betrayal, but the real feeling, before the lies, before the theft. I couldn't. And that broke me in a different way. Because trauma doesn't just steal your present, it rewrites your past. It colors every memory, makes you question every smile, every hug. Was he ever truly proud of me? Did he ever mean it when he said, "I love you, mine"? Or was I just a tool? A means to an end? The thoughts spun like thread in my mind, and no matter how I pulled, the knot only grew tighter. The detective called again the next morning. She informed me the case had officially moved forward. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, words that, months ago, I would have never imagined being tied to my life. Now they were part of my vocabulary, my reality. I asked her, "Will the charges be public?" She paused. Yes. That terrified me more than I expected, because once the truth becomes public, it's no longer yours. It becomes something people talk about, judge, dissect. Neighbors would whisper. Friends would call in that cautious tone, unsure whether to offer pity or outrage. Strangers might read my story in a headline and reduce it to a statistic. But then again, maybe someone else needed to hear it. Maybe someone out there was going through the same thing, suffering in silence, brushing off their doubts, dismissing their own pain because it came dressed in love and family and tradition. Maybe my voice, cracked, aged, trembling, could break someone else's silence. The local news reached out within days. I don't know how they found out. Maybe the station leaked it. Maybe someone on the inside thought it was a story worth telling. At first, I said no. I wasn't ready to put my face to the story. I still felt raw, exposed. But then I thought about the woman I used to be, sitting in the corner of that room eating cold toast, believing she was the problem. And I said yes. The interview was short. The reporter was kind. She asked soft questions, gave me space to answer. I told her what happened. Not all the gruesome details, not the whole arc of pain, but enough. Enough to show the pattern. Enough to show the danger. Enough to let other people, other mothers, other elders, other women like me, know that this kind of betrayal hides behind warm smiles and familiar names. The segment aired 3 days later. That night, my phone, yes, my own phone, which I had finally reclaimed, buzzed constantly. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Messages from strangers. People thanking me. People sharing their own stories. Women who had been manipulated by their children, their nephews, their grandsons. People who thought they were alone in their pain. And now, they weren't. I read every single message. I responded to as many as I could. Because when your story becomes bigger than your pain, you start to heal. Even Beverly changed. She began treating me with a different kind of respect. No longer just the old lady in the room down the hall. No longer just a resident. She started knocking before entering. Asking before acting. She even brought me my favorite brand of tea one evening and left it on my nightstand without a word. Small things, but powerful. I was no longer invisible. One afternoon, as I was folding my clothes by the window, I noticed an envelope slide under my door. No stamp, no name, just soft paper folded twice. I picked it up carefully, heart thumping, and opened it. Inside was a note. I saw the news. "I'm sorry. I should have said something. He asked me to lie. I didn't know it would go that far." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. It belonged to one of Andre's old friends. A boy I used to feed after school. A boy who had grown up in my kitchen, laughing over rice and beans, asking for second helpings of my cornbread. I hadn't seen him in years. But apparently, he had seen more than I realized. The letter didn't change what happened, but it added another thread to the tapestry of truth. And with every truth, my strength grew. I called the detective again, told her about the letter. She asked if I could send it over. I did. The case was growing stronger. But more than that, I was growing stronger. Not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. I began to walk taller, speak louder, laugh again. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in the quiet reclaiming of your own voice, in the way you hold your name, in the way you refuse to shrink anymore. Andre hadn't called again. Not since that one phone call weeks ago. Part of me wondered if he was watching the news, reading the articles, seeing the messages, realizing the story was no longer his to manipulate. It was mine now. Mine to tell, mine to own, and I wasn't done telling it. If you've ever found yourself rebuilding your identity from the ashes of someone else's choices, if you've ever stared down betrayal and said, "Not anymore," then you understand what this part of the story means. It means power. It means freedom. It means you. If this story speaks to your soul, write in the comments, "This is my name, and I'm taking it back." Because reclaiming yourself isn't just an act of defiance, it's an act of survival. And you, my dear, are still here. The legal case was gaining traction, and with it came a strange, unspoken heaviness. People imagine justice as this clean, satisfying moment, like a gavel slamming down or a judge announcing a sentence with finality. But in reality, justice is paperwork. Justice is waiting. Justice is reliving everything over and over again for strangers in suits who scribble notes while you hand over the most painful pieces of your life. They asked me for documents, letters, witnesses, records from years I'd tried to forget. Every time I handed something over, it felt like peeling another layer off my soul. But I did it. I kept doing it, because there was no other way through this fire except right through the center of it. The state had officially picked up the case. The charges were formalized: identity theft, financial fraud, elder abuse, and the last one hit the hardest. I had never thought of myself as a victim of elder abuse. That phrase sounded like something distant, something that happened to other people, older people, frailer people. But it was me. I was the statistic now. And oddly, accepting that label gave me power, because if I could wear it without shame, I could also fight back with it. One afternoon, my lawyer called. A kind woman named Renee, assigned to me through a local legal aid foundation. She'd been patient, thorough, never rushed me. This time, her voice had a new kind of energy. "They've located one of the bank officers who processed the second loan," she said. "He's willing to testify. He remembers your son coming in and pushing the process through aggressively." I held the phone tighter. "And he confirmed it wasn't me?" "Yes. He said the woman who came in looked nothing like your ID. He questioned it. Andre pressured him to move forward anyway. There's a record of his internal complaint. A record. Proof." I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And because when your truth has been ignored for so long, just knowing someone else saw it too feels like a miracle. The wheels of the case began to move faster after that. Dates were set, depositions were scheduled, and with each step forward, I felt the layers of shame that had wrapped themselves around me begin to loosen. I started going for longer walks again, not just around the block, but through the park. I'd pass by playgrounds and watch the children run, their laughter cutting through the heavy silence I carried. I'd smile at the mothers on benches, wondering if they too would one day face the unthinkable, that the same hands they once held could one day betray them. Sometimes I wanted to warn them. Other times I just wanted to sit beside them in quiet solidarity. One morning, I found myself at a little cafe I used to visit when Andre was in high school. I remembered sitting there after dropping him off at soccer practice, sipping coffee while grading assignments from my night school class. The cafe hadn't changed much, same faded cushions, same chalkboard menu, but I had. I wasn't the woman who used to wait for her son with hope anymore. I was the woman who learned how to wait for herself. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I felt real. Renee called again a week later. "I need to prepare you," she said gently. "There's a chance your son will try to settle out of court. We've received word from his attorney." My heart didn't skip a beat. It dropped. "Settle?" I repeated. "He might offer to pay part of the money back, admit to lesser charges, avoid trial." And just like that, all the anger, all the months of climbing out of that pit, threatened to boil over. "He wants to skip the consequences?" I said. "He gets to walk away with a slap on the wrist?" "No," she replied. "But he's scared, and scared people make offers." I didn't respond. Not at first, because I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted him to suffer, to face the courtroom, the press, the judge. I wanted his name printed beside mine, not as a son, but as a criminal. But another part of me, deeper, older, just wanted peace. Renee let me think. Then she added softly, "You have the right to say no." And that's when I realized I had power now, not over him, but over myself. I could choose, not from a place of survival, but from a place of sovereignty. That night, I walked back to my room and sat with a notebook. I wrote down everything I still had to lose, and everything I'd already regained. My name, my voice, my dignity. And I wrote one more thing. He doesn't get to write the ending. I do. A few days later, I told Renee I wanted to move forward. No deals, no shortcuts. Let the truth be heard, in full, by a judge. Let him sit there and see the weight of what he did, reflected in every document, every witness, every minute of my stolen life. She agreed, and just like that, the case continued. Some days I still cried. I won't lie, healing isn't a straight line. Some mornings I woke up and reached for my phone, expecting a message from him, something apologetic, something human, but it never came, and I had to remind myself that silence, too, is an answer. I started journaling more, this time not just for the case, but for myself. I wrote letters I'd never send. I wrote prayers, I wrote poems, I wrote my story, my version, in my words, and every word helped stitch me back together. People still stopped me in the grocery store. "You're the woman from the news," they'd whisper. And I'd smile, nod politely. But inside, I wanted to say, I'm not just the woman from the news. I'm the woman who stood up, who fought back, who didn't disappear. I know some of you watching this video might be in the very beginning of your own battle. You might be carrying the same ache I once did. You might feel confused, ashamed, unsure of what to do next. So let me give you something I wish someone had given me. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You don't have to explain your pain to be believed. You don't have to prove your worth to deserve protection. If this story feels like your own reflection, please take a second and write in the comments, "Justice starts with me." Because sometimes, justice isn't just about courts or laws. It's about claiming yourself back, piece by piece, word by word, breath by breath. The day of the hearing arrived wrapped in gray clouds, not stormy, just still. The kind of quiet that makes the world feel suspended in time, like even the sky is holding its breath. I sat in the hallway of the courthouse, wearing the same navy blue blouse I had worn to Andre's high school graduation. I remember choosing it that day because it felt like something a proud mother should wear. Today, I chose it because I was no longer just someone's mother. I was a woman reclaiming her life, my spine straight, my eyes clear, my heart bruised, but beating. Still, they called my name. I walked into the courtroom slowly, feeling the hush sweep through the space. There were only a handful of people there. The attorneys, a few clerks, a woman from the state's victim advocacy office, and him, Andre. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just diminished. Not because of the suit he wore or the lack of confidence in his eyes, but because I no longer saw him through the lens of hope. I saw him as he was. No filter, no illusion. I didn't look away. The judge entered. We stood. We sat. The proceedings began. I listened as the lawyers read through the charges. I listened as documents were presented. I listened as the man from the bank testified. I watched Andre squirm as his lies were spoken aloud in a room where he had no control. And then, it was my turn. They asked me to speak, to share the impact, the cost, the emotional toll. I stood, walked to the center, and for a moment, I didn't speak at all. I just looked at him. And then, with every ounce of dignity I had left, I said, "You didn't just take money. You didn't just forge my name. You stole my safety, my peace, my trust in the one person I raised with every cell of love in my body. And still, I stand here, not for revenge, but for truth. Because no one, no child, no partner, no family, has the right to turn love into a weapon." There was silence, not a heavy one, an honest one. A silence that carried weight, not shame. When I returned to my seat, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. The judge ruled. The charges stood. Restitution was ordered. Andre would face sentencing in the coming weeks. There was talk of probation, community service, financial penalties. But in that moment, none of it mattered as much as one simple, profound truth. I had spoken, and I had been heard. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The window was open, the breeze gentle, and the world felt new. I didn't feel victorious, not in the way people think justice feels, but I felt steady. And after everything I'd endured, steady was the sweetest feeling I could ask for. I made tea, I sat in my little room, and I lit one more candle, not for grief, but for gratitude, for surviving what I thought would break me, for telling the story I never wanted to live, for becoming the woman who stood when everything else tried to push her down. And for you, yes, you, who listened. You who stayed with me through every breath of this journey. You who may be carrying your own story, your own silent pain, your own name that someone tried to steal. If my voice helped you find a piece of yours, then none of this was in vain. So before we part, I ask you this. If you made it to the end, if my story touched your heart, please take a moment to honor this journey. Leave a like to let others know that these stories matter. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next powerful testimony, because these voices, like yours, deserve to be heard. And if you're here, still with me, I'd love for you to comment, "I'm taking my life back." Let that be your promise to yourself, your declaration to the world, your silent rebellion against the silence they tried to bury you in. And finally, don't leave just yet. The next story is already waiting for you. Click the video that's on your screen now. It's another true journey of survival, of strength, and of finding light even in the darkest corners. You are not alone. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.